right, good morning and welcome to TAO's next session of our Member Resiliency series with Deldelp Medina, Director of Strategy and Research at Black and Brown Founders, as well as Principal at Medina Associates, so not busy at all. I'm Kara Snow, Chief Community Engagement Officer and Chief of Staff here at TAO, and we're going to run through a couple of quick rules of engagement before we start. All of our participants have been muted, so remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you or calls on you to talk. You can respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Justin Martinez, and we'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We will ask you to engage via the participant icon on your screen. Please engage with us on social media during this call and throughout the day. We appreciate all the social support, and you can see where to find us on the slide. And Deldo, I don't know if in the chat you want to drop in either your handle, Black and Brown Founders, or Medina and Associates, so that you can get tagged as well. We have a limited time, so any questions that we don't get to will be captured from the chat, and we will take the unanswered ones to Mobilize, our member engagement platform. It is our member-only virtual community, and we will post unanswered questions from our members there to keep any of the conversation going after the event. If you have questions about joining Mobilize, please reach out to Justin, whose email is on the screen. And if you have any questions about joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org. TAO staff support is provided by me and Justin, but mostly Justin, and we are happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss sponsorship opportunities. A big thank you to Portland State University for underwriting the series. We appreciate their sponsorship and support, and we invite you to join us on Friday as our Resiliency series continues. We will be speaking with Representative John Lively, who sits on the House Interim Committee on Economic Development for the state of Oregon. All right. It is now my pleasure to officially introduce Deldelp Medina. As mentioned before, she's the Director of Research and Strategy for Black and Brown Founders, as well as Principal at Medina and Associates. Deldelp has over 10 years of experience in diversity and inclusion, design thinking, product market fit, scaling, and investment strategy. She brings cross-cultural expertise engaging in meeting the demographic shift by identifying, pitching, structuring, relationship building, negotiating, and creating close strategic partnerships. Deldelp has been a featured speaker at South by Southwest in 2015, a panelist at Latinas Think Big 2015, and a 2015 Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Mentor and 2014 Platform Speaker. Whew. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you present, and what was not mentioned in all of that introduction is that you are also a woman in tech and have coded and started businesses. And so it's really exciting to have you here today. So I'm going to hand it over to you because I think you're going to be our presenter versus me asking you questions. And I'm super excited to hear what you're going to talk about.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And we're going to get started on the right presentation. Thank you, Kara. Good morning, everybody. I hope you are all doing well today. I am coming from very foggy San Francisco, hence the turtleneck, because it's a little chilly this morning. And I'm really excited to be speaking with folks up in Oregon. I have a lot of friends, family, and great connections and community folks that I've acquired over the years in Oregon and in Portland in particular. And so I'm a big lover of the state. So this is a little bit about me. At the end of the day, I'm a big nerd. I was the only girl in the after-school computer club at Alvarado Elementary here in San Francisco. I bought my first computer at the age of 15. At the time, it cost as much as a used car. All my friends thought I was nuts. I worked then at a bulletin board service, and then I became a dot-commer. And nowhere along this trajectory did I actually study computer science or anything formally. I was always brought along, taught by others, mentored, had informal fellowships and agreements with other folks that were nerds and were interested in what was being built out on the internet and on computers. And I say that because it led me to understand certain things about not only how do we work as human beings, but how can computers and technology help us interact, right? And so I became really interested in data, and I became a database administrator. I learned SQL 1.0, one of the first kind of like big relational databases. And it was something that was always interesting to me. And I suddenly came upon an understanding that data does a lot of things that help you build resiliency. It helps you understand where you are and what you're thinking. And this is all before lean startup methodology. This is all before we are in the current age where we're all gathering data all the time, right? If you are building a tech company, if you're working at a tech company, you are always being held accountable and being thought through, and you have to think through how to measure things. How do you weigh one thing versus the other? What is more effective, right? And you're trying to figure out what are these efficiencies so that you can deliver at the end of the day something for your customers, right? So that your customers feel like they have value in what they're engaging with. At the end of the day, like the reason we all have these is because it makes our lives more efficient. It's a little mini computer in our pocket. It's a way of us being able to engage with each other. It's a way of us being able to keep track of work. It's a way of us having fun. It's a way of thinking, but all of it is really built on data. And none of it could really exist unless we were always constantly monitoring. So when we're looking at the current moment that we're in right now, both with the pandemic and the racial unrest that we're all been experiencing, that is also being driven by data. Like, you cannot separate these things from each other. And it's important for us to keep track of. And so when you're thinking of your racial equity lens, and when you're thinking of how do we make sure that our companies are being equitable and thoughtful and engaging folks, what does that look like? At the end of the day, you need the data. And so often folks that are in the HR space or in other spaces that deal with the human beings have very little access to data in terms of who's applying, how are people, going through your pipeline, what does your pipeline actually look like? And so I go to, what does data have to do with resiliency? It helps you become better. So I don't know if anybody that's currently on does any sort of exercise. So whether you're jogging or you're walking or whatever, I find personally being held accountable and holding myself accountable by keeping track of how many miles I'm walking, right? Of how many miles I'm running. That is a great resiliency marker, because then you can see over time, what are your patterns and how are you doing? Oh, this week I didn't log in as many miles as last week. What's going on? Did I eat well? Did I sleep well? Did I have a stressful week? What is it that affected the outcomes of the thing that I love to do, right? And I think that is why it's important for you to think through it. It's a self-education mechanism, and then you're holding yourself accountable that if you have a certain goal you're trying to meet, hey, here's the actual data that you can, show yourself, and you can show yourself your own growth and your own opportunity. So here's some things about the workplace today. We've never had workplaces like we have right now. This didn't happen a generation ago. This didn't happen 2 generations ago. And the reality is how the workplace is being constructed right now is going to become more and more diverse. More people are out in the workplace. There are more women and parents that are working within the workplace. There are more folks of color that are looking and finding opportunity. There is more needs that people have in terms of engaging workers and being able to keep workers and being able to find highly skilled workers. And so all of these things are really difficult at this moment in time, and we are making it up as we go along. But we're also making it up as we go along without having some hard and necessary conversations around equity and inclusion, around anti-racism, around anti-homophobia and anti-trans. Like, these things are important because all of us need to be included in the workplace for us to have a viable economy, for us to be able to engage in the things that we love, right? So whether somebody has gone to a coding boot camp, has gotten some sort of degree in anthropology, and then went into UX UI, whether somebody is an engineer. It doesn't really matter whether you're in finance or marketing or legal, any of the things that make companies thrive, and in particular tech companies today. The reality is that this is a workplace that we have to reimagine in some ways, right? And that we have to rethink. And that when you're rethinking and reimagining something, which is one of the beauties that I love about startups, and one of the things that I absolutely just love about technology, is you're literally building something that didn't exist before. You're solving a problem that people have had with a different lens and a different point of view that has never existed before. Yet at the same time, our systems that deal with human beings are still very stuck in a 1950s, 1960s model. The 40-hour work week as we know it, the 40-hour work week within a white-collar setting as we know it, was actually invented and created post-World War II for white heterosexual men who had spouses at home that would take care of childcare, right? Most white heterosexual cisgendered men today are nothing like their grandparents or great-grandparents or their fathers. The realities are that we are living within a very different context, and yet we're keeping systems in place that weren't built for a lot of us. And as a result, a lot of us are not seeing success. And a lot of us are having frustration. I think that most people can, whether you're a parent or not, you know, all those videos of people having their kid come in and run in and kind of interrupt, like that is a part of a reality, right? Nobody planned for a pandemic, and nobody planned a workplace for a pandemic, and yet here we are, right? And so when you're thinking through what does it look like for you to put on an equity lens and for you to think what and who is going to be working with you, what are the things that they need, how are they different from the current systems that we have? All of those things are systems thinking, and I think tech people in particular have the ability to do that when it comes to building a product. But so often we're not applying the same thing to how are you building your company culture? How are you hiring? How are you recruiting? How are you engaging? How are you promoting folks that are internal? So the reality is also that diversity and inclusion and anti-racism actually leads to great thinking and engagement. Because when a person feels comfortable in a workplace, when a person can say, hey, I see a problem, and then they're listened to, the reality is that you have a better product. And I can give you example after example after example of giant corporations that have made huge mistakes because they weren't listening to a person who they considered or was seen through a different lens and wasn't engaged in and didn't feel like they were being engaged in. So as you know, we're going through this kind of racial reckoning, which is long overdue, by the way. You can see example after example of people saying, I raised my hand when X, Y, and Z was happening at the company, and nobody listened to me. And people wanted to listen to the status quo, and I was seen as a troublemaker. And as a result of that, it made my job very difficult. It was very stressful for me, but more importantly, for the customers that we had, and the job that I loved, and the engagement that I had, it was a terrible experience. And so this is a moment, once again, where you have to build a muscle around understanding what does it look like for us to have a workplace where everybody feels comfortable raising their hands. And I know for leadership it is difficult, and it is also a muscle that must be built of understanding who to listen and why. At the end of the day, most leaders that are within tech companies, you're trying to filter through as much information as possible, and it is a difficult position that you're in, but it is a position of a great power and great accountability that you have to build in for yourself, right? So that with that power, you have a counterbalance of the accountability for yourself, and you can actually spend the time of thinking through who is it that I need to listen to, and what is it that they're saying, for you not to be judgmental towards what they're saying, for you not to feel attacked of what they're saying, for you to feel like, at the end of the day, what is this person trying to communicate with me, and how can we have a better bond and understanding? How can I be a leader at this company to show people like I'm really listening and engaging? That doesn't mean that you're going to take everybody's, and I say this in particular because I think so often people say to me, but this is overwhelming. And yes, it is overwhelming. But I think that for a lot of folks in leadership positions that have never had to do this work, it's just like if you're starting out a new exercise regime or a new diet or a new way of thinking or a new meditation. It is rewiring your brain to actually take into consideration things that you've never had to consider. And that there are historical and sociological reasons for that, but that it doesn't mean that it's impossible, and it doesn't mean that you can't come to things without a sense of curiosity. Curiosity at the end of the day is what's going to get you through this. Curiosity at the end of the day is why you started your tech company. If you're a CEO and a leader right now, like, you saw a problem and you wanted to fix it. That's the way that CEOs and leaders usually work. They go, oh my God, I see an opportunity here. How can I take advantage of that, right? This moment right now is a moment for you to take opportunity and to take stock in what is it that I have and how far do I have to go? And so often you don't know how far you have to go because you haven't made the proper assessment, which is why to me, data is important. And for you to have the data that you need to build an equitable organization and an anti-racist organization is super important. These are some of the questions that you should be thinking of. They are by no means all of the questions you should be thinking of. You can be looking at benefits, for example. You could be taking a look at paid time leave. There's a whole bunch of other things that you could be taking a look at, because the reality is that we as human beings have different needs that need to be met, and no one workplace has all of those things met. But how is it that you can build a company and build a leadership that takes into consideration the humans that are actually working with you and the needs that they have and the opportunities that they're bringing to you based upon their education and skill set level, but also their lived experience. And so I want to round this out, and I'm also taking a look at time because I want to leave some time for a question and answer, to say, no, this work is not easy, but no work is ever easy. And that resiliency for me personally has meant that even when I have had horrible disasters happen for me, both personally and professionally, you've gotten up and you kept on going. And at the end of the day, that's all we can hope for, is that next day is going to be a better day. And we're going to be able to engage each other in respectful and helpful ways, rather than in dismissive and destructive ways. So I'm going to wrap it up with that, just keeping in mind. And if there's any questions that you want to pose to me, Kara, and also you can follow me at Deldelp or at BB Founders, and I'm more than happy to talk about my BB Founders work, where we're working with Black and Latinx founders of color who have their own tech and tech-enabled companies.
That was awesome. And I do have a couple of questions for you. There was an article actually in it. This is tying back to how work is not set up for the modern day. And I think we've heard this before, that buildings are heated and cooled for men in suits. And so they tend to run really cold. And there is an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that talked about how women and men respond to different questions, and not respond like their speed of answer and getting the questions right, both math and verbal, based on temperature, and how at warmer temperatures, women are on par with men, but at colder temperatures, they don't keep up as well. And so I read that and I was like, yeah, this is something that we need to be looking at our workplaces. And so my question based on that is like, how do you filter through all of the data? Because there is so much. And I'm sure there's a report out there that says that cool buildings are better. So like, how do you do that as you're talking about your equitable workplaces?
Yeah, I think that you do that in an iterative process. You're not going to tackle everything at once, right? Like the whole idea of the lean startup methodology, which is you have a hypothesis, you go out there, you gather a whole bunch of data, you build something, you have a version 1 of something, you get some more data, then you come out with version 2. I think that culture is the same thing. I've said this publicly before. I think it's an interesting moment to say what I'm about to say because it's within a different context. And so I just want to call that out, which is culture is not a fixed point and it is not a statue. Culture is a living, breathing thing. Culture
Yep.
is something that's ever changing and that we're engaging with. And that we're also, being able to build a certain understanding. And so what was cool and fun and okay 5 years ago, 10 years ago, just isn't right now. And so that if you think through, like for that example of like the temperature, well, let's look at also our carbon footprint, right? How does it affect us to have these temperatures for our carbon footprint? There are questions that you need to ask, but it has to be done in an iterative process so that one, it doesn't feel overwhelming, but two, you're also learning in the process of it all. And that's what I think is exciting for me when I work with tech folks, is that a lot of these things we are using to build product. We're using to interact with customers. And so often we are not applying it to our actual internal company cultures. And there's an opportunity there to take the same skill sets that you have to build a product, to think through what are the issues that you're having. It is difficult because it is it's very personalized, right? We're literally talking about people's bodies and people's safety. And so that can be very high tension, but there are methodologies and there are ways of thinking. And there is a lot of education out there that you can engage with that can help you think through these systems.
And I like that about making the proper assessment, because one of the notes I took when you were talking is the data is also going to change. So we had a conversation earlier this week that 1 in 4 students in public school here in Oregon today is Latinx. And so that means K through 12. And if organizations aren't building leadership teams that reflect Latinx leaders, then how are those students ever going to go into those careers? And how is that pipeline of students going to change over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years? So it's really interesting that it's not static. And I love that reminder that we work as technologists, and most of us build products or solutions, and no one has ever expected it to work the first time. I mean, I've never had a solution that I expected to work the first time. So it's that being comfortable, like failing and then assessing the data again. So I like that. Okay, I have 2 more questions. So I loved how you tied it in to exercise, because I'm a runner. And my question is, for people that are listening, that are working in tech or leading IT departments, do you have any current suggested accountability metrics? And I hate asking like the where we should start question, but in your opinion, what data exists that you think we could leverage? And I mean, I think that we probably just threw one out with like what the school pipeline looks like for students, but what else is out there that you think is relevant that we should be taking into consideration?
I'm a huge census nerd, and we are in the 2020 census right now. So fill out your census form. You can fill it out online. It's the first time it's ever been available. But it is a great data point because it allows you to understand who are your neighbors, who's living within your area. And EEOC data that's also collected, excuse me, that's also collected when you are hiring people. Most people's HR systems have EEOC data. Often people aren't looking at it. There are some gaps and there's issues, and depending on the systems that you work, it's not going to be perfect. I think having internal surveys is important, and being able to say, okay, what is the population of the area that I'm in or the areas where my company works? Who are we actually hiring? Who's actually in the room? And who's missing? Who do we need? I think like that's a very simple place to start. And it then causes you to think through a lot of very complex and subtle things, right? Because then it makes you look at your recruiting pipeline, for example. Like, oh, where are we hiring people from? If you do an internal survey and you're like, oh, everybody's coming from this particular school. Why is that? Oh, it could be because the CEO went to that school or the CTO went to that school, or you have a relationship with that school. What is the makeup of that school? Who's actually attending that school? Oh, okay, this is why we have the numbers that we have. what are some other schools? So I'll give you an example. I was working at a tech company, and we had a partner company that we were working with, and they suddenly realized, oh, when we went to this one particular school, the number of women of color applicants like went up through the roof. But when we went to this other school to recruit, that wasn't the case. And we're looking for women of color and we're looking for women of color that want to go into leadership. So we're talking graduate school applicants on very specific kind of technology that they were building. And they were like, this is the school that we have to go and recruit. And so then they made a plan to be able to engage those professors and engage the student body versus going to 4 or 5 different schools and saying, okay, let's see who comes in, and then getting the same sort of applicants. When they particularly had a goal that they had set in mind, they were looking for partners for it. And by having that data, they were able to then say, oh, this is actually the place that we need to be engaging. It's the place that we were least engaging, but now we understand they're the place that we actually need to be in closer partnership with, because we're getting amazing candidates to meet our goals. And, you know, they have the technical knowledge that we need, and they have a different perspective based upon their own lived experiences. But it also has, it's a school that has both a technology program and an arts program. Wow, like that's bringing us different kinds of candidates overall, regardless of their gender or race or ethnicity. And so I think like asking some preliminary questions: who's in the room? Yeah. Who would you like to be in the room? Where are people coming from? How can we do better? Leads you to more complex thinking, but at least you have a sense of like where you're standing.
Yeah, the baseline. I love that you're a data nerd. I kind of am too. I don't know if you've ever looked at the National Equity Index.
Oh yeah.
I love it. I mean, that's, I think, a great place to start too, because it shows trends based on like hospital records and folks moving into areas of like what the demographics will look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 years. And I think it's interesting to build companies that way. All right. So we've got like 1 minute left, and you've been amazing, but we always end with one question that's a little more fun. We've all been doing these meetings this way on the phone, and you talked about kids running across and whatnot. So what is the funniest experience you've had or witnessed over the last 4 months while being in a Zoom call?
Oh, wow. I have seen funny things. I've seen, it's been everything from people not having their camera the right way to, you know, I think the time also when you're so isolated from each other has like a different spectrum of meaning. So people either running in at the last minute or not showing up. I've literally sat in a Zoom by myself being like, oh, is anybody gonna show up? And then everybody texting me like, oh my God, I didn't realize I had to be on Zoom. I've also had the experience, I don't know if you guys have had this, of like different people doing different calendars with different types of things. So it's like one person set up a WebEx, another person set up a Zoom, another person set up a Hangout.
Yep.
Another person like, and I'm like, which of these methods are we supposed to use to talk to each other? Sometimes I just think it's easier just to pick up the phone and like just do a group call.
My personal favorite, because we use G Suite, is like we set up the Google Hangout and then we also put a Zoom in there, so then it's like extra confusing.
Yeah, exactly. That was yesterday. I was like, and a person texting me, which meeting, where am I supposed to meet you guys? And I'm like, oh my God.
Where am I supposed to meet you guys in the online world?
Exactly. Well, where are you? Because she was on the one thing and we were on the other. And I was like, oh.
That's so funny. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to end by saying that the folks that are listening and the recording that we'll have, we actually are going to be a community partner this year with Black and Brown Founders for their Chroma conference. And so more details on that. And we're super excited to be supporting the community in a different way than we have in the past. So times are changing and we're happy to be a part of them.
Yeah. By the way, I know that there's 2 questions, one from Matthew Mitchell and one from Kathleen Freytag. Go ahead and tweet me at Twitter if you're on Twitter. If not, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only person in the world with my name, so you will always find me. And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions there.
Awesome. And we'll capture those and send those over to you too in an email so you have them.
Okay.
Sorry, y'all. I got so excited just having this conversation. Everybody have a really great day,
Yes.
and stay warm in San
Yes.
Francisco. We
Yes.
get 88 degrees
I
in
hope the
Portland
sun
today.
comes out, but let's see what happens.
We'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take
All
care.
right, take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.